Can you watch a film incorrectly is a question that I've been thinking about for quite some time now. And when I ask people to kind of gauge their reactions and opinions, there tends to be two main schools of thought. There tends to be the one where it's like, well, obviously you can watch a film incorrectly. You could be on your phone or talking to people or Netflix and chilling. It's not engaging with the actual film or television show itself, so therefore it's incorrect. But then there's also the other school of thought that most people tend to fall into, where it's like, well, you put a film on or series to almost as background noise, and who are you to say that someone isn't getting value from that, even if they're not giving it's their full undivided attention. And while I definitely fall into the camp of thinking that the best way to see a film is in the cinema, I can't sit here and say that just because someone doesn't watch a film in any given way means that they don't get value from that. Like, take a television series. There are plenty with so many filler episodes. Like, it's nice to just have on, almost be living with the characters, and it can be an absolute comfort, even if you've seen the episode 30 times. It's like you invite these people into your lives, and even though they're fictional, you can still get a lot of comfort from them, especially in a comedy show. I mean, look at how popular Friends is, and I think it's for like that very reason, because it has the surface level jokes that if you're only mildly paying attention, you can still laugh at and have a good time. But then it's also got all the stuff where you can really heavily invest and learn to like love these characters. And when I talk about watching films in the cinema being my preferred way of watching them, I don't mean this in like an elitist sense. I mean it as in what was Mark Strong and now John Boyega. What they say is like, it is just an incredible way of getting lost in the story and using that as escapism. Because also in the cinema, I'm not saying that people need to be autonomous droids that just don't react to anything that they're watching. It's so much fun if you're in a crowded theatre and you're watching a comedy and you're feeling the warmth of it all as everyone's laughing to the same jokes, even if the film isn't like the best in the world. But also if it's a horror film, everyone being on the edges of their seats, hoping that the main character makes it out alive, or even if it's kind of like everyone's like, this character's annoying as hell, I hope the killer catches up to them. And I think it's really beautiful how a whole room of strangers who will likely never meet properly and never speak to them again, how they can kind of have this unique shared experience. It's the same as if you're going to a music concert and then everyone's kind of singing along the words, because there's whole cultures around different films of like, if you're going to go and see Tommy Wiseau's The Room, for example, there's all these intricate details of like, if you're going, then you throw spoons at the screen, and it's insane, because if that's how people engage with the film and the text, then all the power to them. I would love to go to one of those screenings. But then there's also a very fine line with that, because you wouldn't want people talking through a whole film if you're at the cinema and you've all paid to be there, especially if you do have like the famous example of like a screaming, kicking baby like on the row behind you hitting your seat. But then also I understand that, especially at the minute, given current world events, cinemas aren't always practical for everyone. Watching the same film at home, you've still watched the film. Yes, it's not been on a screen the size of the wall necessarily, but you've still seen the film. And I know IMAX is a completely different debate, because I mean, if we go into the debate of like the medium of things, like there's obviously the new Disney Plus IMAX enhanced stuff. You could then have the debate of Blu-ray and not Blu-ray streaming. But I mean, it was only in the news last week that Christopher Nolan stabbed someone and left them in the ICU because they watched Tenet on DVD and not on 70mm IMAX projection. And so I feel like it's a difficult debate to have when there's such high stakes. But even then, while I personally would never want to watch a film on my phone, if someone watches a film on Netflix on their phone, then they've still seen the film. And that's why I think it's tricky when it's talking about the thing itself, on where and why people watch things in certain places. Because seeing Dune in the cinema, and you have like the deep bass of the speakers going off, and it's all like you are just fully immersed in that space. And yeah, that might not be the same at home, but at the end of the day, you will still have seen the same film. Although, I mean, I fully regret not seeing that one in IMAX, because if I were to watch a film on VHS on this television, yes, it's not in the high definition of like a 4K TV or like a 4K Blu-ray, but there's so much nostalgia there. It could almost mean a lot more to see it on this, away from that slightly. There's so many different cuts of certain films. Just look at Blade Runner with how many different cuts there are of that film. And so I've spoken to some people who haven't seen it because they are kind of confused and a little bit lost as to which one they should actually see. And then there's how films can be edited down for television so that they can be played before a certain time, like pre-Watershed and whatnot.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
So the different ways that they cover different expletives and they cover up little, like, just look at some of the Disney Plus edits that they've done of old films.
Hey, come back!
But then fully outside the context of that and just talking about the films themselves, could you view them incorrectly if you're watching them from a different mindset? So take like the Pixar theory, for example. It's not like a binary thing on yes or no or whatnot, but it's an extra fun thing that like a whole number of fans have put together. I mean, there are the videos by like the Super Carlin brothers and whatnot. And it's like, if you watch it through that lens, you notice all the little Easter eggs and the little details. And so that could potentially take someone out of the story. But then when it's animation and like everything in frame is intentional and is left there, it's a fun thing for people to point out. And they're normally on the first watch are lost in the story. And then it's then on rewatches, they notice more things. And so I think when it's a fun, innocent thing like that, yes, it can kind of, you've got this different headcanon in your mind of like, oh, this takes place here and that takes place there. And it's still innocent fun in comparison to the films. But then there are some films where it's like, you need that. Like, look at the Marvel films. It's really difficult if you want to go into Infinity War and Endgame, having seen none of the other Marvel films. But I mean, even then, if you watch a sequel to a film, even outside of the whole like 27-part Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it is just like this, the second part to a story, and you haven't seen the first part, you might not be able to appreciate it so much as if you'd seen the first one. But that's not to say that you couldn't still enjoy it as a film in itself. And even though it might pain me that some people watch The Godfather 2 before the first one, or what have you, they've still seen the film, and then the other one could act as a prequel, or even if someone watches a prequel that was released after, before the originals. Like, I watched the 3 Hobbit films before I'd seen The Lord of the Rings, and so I thought, oh, these are fun little innocent films. And then everyone just who'd seen The Lord of the Rings was like, why do you like this? But then I think that it's how people engage in that and get meaning from it. When I watched Darren Aronofsky's Mother, for example, I went in completely blind, not knowing anything about it. And then I came out of the film completely blind, not knowing anything about it. And then it's then only then when I went home and I researched it and I read up on, oh, this means that, and then this is an allegory for what have you. But then I wouldn't say that I watched the film incorrectly. That's not the automatic thing that my brain associates or like goes to with it. Like originally how it was said that Bong Joon-ho wanted Parasite to have white bars above and below the screen. If you've seen the film with black bars, that doesn't mean that you haven't seen the film. And so I think there's so many interesting details around all of this that could just kind of be seen as surface level or like nitpicking or like really going in on the minutiae. Because at the end of the day, I don't feel like I've missed out on any part of Parasite because I didn't see it with the white bars. And it's the same with how they've released like the black and white version, which you can kind of see that it wasn't shot with black and white in mind. I mean, it still looks gorgeous, it's Parasite. And then on the other hand, it can get to the more serious stuff. Like The Nightingale is a film by Jennifer Kent, who did The Babadook. It's her follow-up film, and it's an interesting one. When I first watched it, I watched it with a friend, and there are some scenes in it, to say the least. And it's these long, disgusting, painful, hard to watch scenes. And I know and understand and respect that it is Jennifer Kent's like artistic vision to have these long, arduous scenes that could be very triggering for people. It definitely puts you in the character's viewpoint. And I think at the very start of the scenes, it conveyed personally as much as it would have done, as much as it did throughout the whole duration of those scenes, if that makes sense. So even though those scenes would go on for a while, I still found myself fast forwarding 20-30 seconds until it cut to the next bit, because I got the point that it conveyed, but it made me so incredibly uncomfortable. I am very much myself as a filmmaker. I would love it if when everyone watched like my short films that they were in a cinema and they had like the full immersive experience, especially if it was one of the more intended as horror pieces, if it was dark outside and they either wore it with headphones or what have you. But once you put something out there into the world, you're then like no longer in control of how people view it. You kind of need to, especially when you're color grading and everything, you're doing it to the lowest common denominator, so you don't know exactly the colors that are going to come out on one TV over the other. So you kind of need to work around that in a sense. I've not seen the film in the way that Jennifer Kent intended, and so technically I have seen it incorrectly, but I think the filmmaker's intentions completely go out the window when it does become serious, if it does become triggering for someone. Because obviously the reason why we make films is to make people feel, to make people understand. They're empathy machines, is to make you feel like you've lived a life that you would never know of. And I think that's an incredible, beautiful part about them. I had last summer the amazing opportunity to have my final year graduation film, Can You Hear the Choir, played at an outdoor cinema. And it was an incredibly surreal experience seeing people watch and react to my film that I've never met before, because obviously there's a lot of, when you first start out in film, there's a lot of, hey, please can you sit and watch this and offer some feedback. And so there were some people in the back row watching through their fingers as like the events unfolded, especially towards the end, even though they're not seeing every single frame. And it's not in like a serious way, it's not like a triggering film, hopefully. But even though they're not seeing every single frame and they're like missing certain parts of it, it's like, I would never argue that they watched the film incorrectly, because it's how they engaged with the piece and they were like, I don't want to know, I don't want to see what happens. And it was an incredibly fun, surreal experience. Hello, Millie. What are your thoughts on this? I agree. This is Millie. Her favourite film is The Matrix Reloaded, because she is a woman of culture and a fan of cinema. At the end of the day, I can't say that, even though personally I feel like going on your phone during a film, you wouldn't get the full experience of the story and what the filmmaker's trying to say. But then on the other hand, if that's how someone gets enjoyment from films, I struggle to be the person to sit here and say, no, you're wrong, that's wrong. And so I think that's one of the beautiful things about art. It's not just the fact that it's up to interpretation, but it's the fact that so many people can love and enjoy it in their own ways. They watch films in their own way. They enjoy and consume it in their own way. Yeah, all this to say, films are cool. They're real pretty cool sometimes. You enjoy films how you want to enjoy films. Thank you.
Now, the XL is the primary target.